What's the kill count for one Earth soldier? The cadets laughed until they saw the footage. The case was the wrong size for what was inside it, too small to hold a war, too heavy to pretend it didn't. Commander Drevid Ossian set it on the lectern with a sound like a door closing on an argument. The amphitheater of the Vithrak Tactical Institute hummed with the heat of 60 alien bodies. Cadet claws clicked against bench armrests. Someone laughed, then another. Within 3 seconds, the laughter had synchronized into the casual rhythm of a room about to place bets on something it had already decided was safe to mock. Ossian waited for the room to stop laughing. He didn't move, he didn't speak. The silence that follows when a commander stops waiting is louder than the noise that precedes it. This case, he said, has not been opened in this facility for 11 years. His voice carried the weight of someone who had counted every one of those years. I've held clearance to access its contents since the day it arrived. The decision to use it here is mine alone. A Thressi cadet in row 4, Preth, decorated in fresh rank scarring, leaned toward her benchmate. Kill ratio demonstration, they all die the same way. Ossian activated the lectern display without acknowledging her. A small object appeared on the secondary screen, a brass timer, cracked crystal face, needle stopped mid-tick. This belonged to the subject, he said. He kept it clipped to his left shoulder strap. Not for tactical purposes, he refused to die before it ran out. The laughter stopped. Sergeant Davin Rowe, Ossian continued, Earth Ground Division, Crater 7 Advance. Final engagement timestamp 54 minutes 38 seconds. What you're about to see is not a training recording. It was never meant to leave classified archives. I'm showing it to you because every model you've studied says what you're about to watch is impossible. The models are wrong, not about what happened, about why it happened. He placed his secondary claw against the edge of the lectern, a gesture so habitual he no longer noticed it. The metal was cool, real, something to press against. The Korath hegemony maintains 340 confirmed dead from this engagement, Ossian said. 57 additional incapacitated, 1 soldier, 60 rounds total, no exoframe, no AI targeting, no resupply. Before I show you the footage, I want you to place your bets. How many seconds until vital signs flatline? Write it down. You'll want to know later how far you were from correct. The cadets exchanged glances. A Sarathi recruit in the middle section, Anal, serious-minded, already pulling her notation console forward, raised a claw. What's the atmospheric composition of Crater 7? Breathable for humans, Ossian said. Barely. The settlement had been there for 3 generations. He knew the terrain. That matters more than any of you realize. He reached toward the activation panel. His claw hovered there for a moment, a pause long enough for the room to feel the weight of what was about to happen. Once I start this, he said, don't look away, not because it will be graphic, because you'll miss the moment it stops making sense. He activated the uplink. The feed opened on Rowe crawling through blackened mud. The scope of his chemical propellant rifle was cracked. His left arm was already bleeding, not heavily, but with the steady rhythm of something that had been bleeding for long enough to matter. The helmet HUD flickered at the edge of the frame, cycling through data his suit was struggling to keep organized. Oxygen 97%, suit integrity 98%, distance to objective 2.3 kilometers. The objective was marked in red, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The first shot came 0.8 seconds into the feed. The sound hit the amphitheater like a physical impact, not the hum of an energy weapon, not the resonant crack of plasma discharge, brass and combustion. Chemistry, fire, every carapace in the room flinched. 3 Korath infantry in the feed went down. One of them was supposed to be wearing Class 4 plating, rated to stop small-caliber rounds at this distance. The plating didn't stop them. The Korath soldier stopped instead. Ossian paused the feed. Armor rating, he said, does not account for shot placement. He had studied Korath anatomy, probably during his unit's orientation brief, probably not expecting he'd need it. He needed it anyway. He let the frame hold on the 3 bodies for 5 seconds, then resumed. Rowe moved through the rubble field with the precision of someone allocating remaining function. Every action was economic, no wasted motion, no panic. The HUD readout showed ammunition, 58 rounds remaining, vitals, elevated heart rate but holding. The suit was reporting that it didn't expect him to be alive in 7 minutes. He didn't seem to have read that report. A Sarathi cadet made a note, then another. The clicking of stylus against console spread through the room like an infection. 10 minutes into the footage, Rowe's left leg gave up its structural integrity. The compound fracture came from a partial collapse he triggered deliberately, timing the rubble slide to cover his movement and using his own body weight as the trigger. The break happened on camera, bone through skin. visible in the corner of the helmet lens. He screamed not quietly, the feed didn't filter it. And then he moved. Ossian didn't pause the footage this time. He let the room sit in it, the sound of a man deciding that the pain was data, not permission to stop. Rowe found a salvaged drone carcass 20 meters north, hauled the broken leg along behind him like cargo, and located the drone's auxiliary oxygen port. The battery was half depleted but functional. He drew a shattered bayonet blade across the battery's heating element, not the blade, the element itself. The blade heated red in his grip. He cauterized the wound. The glove he bit down on was already torn. Sweat ran into his eyes so that the last seconds of the procedure were filmed through a blur. When it was over, he sat very still in the shelter of the drone wreck, breathing in measured pulls, and waited for the shaking to stop. The shaking didn't stop. He moved anyway. Ossian pressed the flat of his secondary claw against the edge of the lectern again. 22 minutes into the footage, Rowe's ammunition count was down to 38 rounds. The kill counter had climbed to 79. He was moving through the engagement zone using terrain as a second weapon, routing enemies through collapse points, timing shots through converging lines, using the enemy's own coordination patterns against them. The Korath operated on a pheromone-based squad cohesion system. When they encountered something outside their modeled parameters, they defaulted to group consensus. Consensus took time. Rowe had done the mathematics. He used every second of that hesitation. A Vthrak cadet in the back row, Emrek Das, who had been silent until now, made a sound that wasn't a word, just a soft exhalation. Recognition. This was the moment Emrek understood that he was watching someone use the very doctrine he had been taught as a weapon against itself. Preth, the Thressi cadet who had laughed at the start, had stopped clicking her claws against the armrest. Her notation console had been closed for 3 minutes. She was just watching now. The oxygen system failed at 34 minutes. Rowe's suit reported the failure with a calm urgency it had probably been trained to maintain even at the end. He didn't panic. He found the wrecked Earth-made drone's auxiliary port and rerouted his line into it. The connection hissed, the readout flickered. New oxygen count 10 minutes, it would have to be enough. At 37 minutes, an Allied squad transmitted a distress ping from the ridge to the north. The signal was weak, encrypted, but readable if you knew what you were listening for. Rowe knew. He checked his ammunition count, 16 rounds remaining, and adjusted his course toward the ridge. The feed cut to black. 7 seconds of static, no image, just the sound of the feed itself, a rushing white noise hum that filled the amphitheater like a held breath. When the feed returned, Rowe was still alive. A Korath soldier was not. The collision had been hand-to-hand. The Korath had mass and reach advantage. Rowe had already accepted the trade-off. The cost of the exchange was written across his suit, new damage to the right shoulder, left ribs compromised but still moving. The kill counter incremented to 80. He injected something into his arm, a stimulant, field-manufactured, the kind of thing that buys you function for a price you pay later if you survive. He didn't expect to survive. The price was someone else's problem. Ossian let the room absorb the next 8 minutes in silence. At 41 minutes into the footage, Rowe reached the ridge. The Allied squad was pinned in a collapsed bunker system, 5 soldiers, 3 wounded, ammunition running low. They had transmitted the distress ping as a formality. They did not expect retrieval. When Rowe appeared at the bunker's northern entrance, bleeding from at least 4 visible wounds and moving with the economy of someone whose body had already decided how much function remained, one of the soldiers made a sound that wasn't a word. Rowe didn't speak. He handed over his last loaded weapon, a full magazine, 16 rounds, and something that might have been a nod. The squad leader, a human named Kess, tried to grab his arm. "Where are you going?" Rowe checked his oxygen readout, 6 minutes. Maybe 5 if the stimulant wore off faster than projected. "Back to the ridge, you hold here." He didn't say for how long, he didn't say if reinforcements come. The objective was implicit in every word he didn't speak. "Rowe, you can't." "The objective hasn't changed." Rowe was already moving. He turned back toward the engagement zone with an empty rifle and 1 fragmentation charge with an adjustable delay. No cover, no reinforcement incoming. The Korath advance line was between him and the objective. Rowe descended openly into it the way you walk into something that's already made its decision about you. The amphitheater was completely silent now. Ossian didn't pause the footage. The feed continued in real time, the audio track capturing Rowe's breathing, harsh and mechanical through the suit's external pickups, the only sound below the distant crack of the Korath energy weapons. The kill counter continued to increment. 95, 103, 117, numbers without meaning, just the evidence that he was still moving. At 47 minutes, Rowe detonated the fragmentation charge inside a Korath fortification vent. The secondary explosion cascaded through two interconnected positions. The Korath infantry in those positions either died or fell back. Rowe kept moving. 3 seconds after the detonation, a plasma bolt caught him in the lateral thorax. The suit's catastrophic damage alarm screamed once, a sound like an animal that had finally given up pretending it was going to survive. Rowe fell. The feed tilted. The sky and the ridge and the bodies of the Korath he had killed swung across the frame in a slow rotation. He got up. This was the moment a Sarathi cadet in the middle section made a sound that required her to leave the amphitheater. Ossian did not pause, he did not acknowledge her departure. The story doesn't stop for people who can't finish watching it. Rowe's suit was flatlined. The damage readout no longer bothered with percentages. The system had concluded there were no percentages left to report. Oxygen 0, blood pressure unmeasurable, left leg structural failure. The suit had stopped issuing alarms because the situation had transcended the category of situation. This was aftermath. This was the thing that happened after you stopped. He was still holding the empty rifle. The ridge was 200 meters north. The objective marker on the HUD, the place where the Allied squad needed covering fire, where they could reposition, where they could maybe survive the next extraction window, was marked in red. It had been marked in red at the start of the engagement. It was still marked in red, the color hadn't changed, the objective hadn't changed. Rowe moved toward it. The Korath advance line saw him, all of them. A solo combatant moving openly, no cover, no weapons that were still functional, moving toward them with the steady advance of something that had already decided the outcome and was simply executing the terms. Every Korath soldier within visual range tracked him. The pheromone cohesion network lit up, the species' internal consensus system, the thing that made them lethal in coordinated assault, the same system that required 4 to 7 seconds to reach consensus when something deviated from doctrine. Rowe had done the mathematics, he used every second. At 54 minutes, his oxygen readout hit 0. The suit didn't so much stop functioning as admit that it had stopped functioning several minutes prior and had simply been running on inertia. The vital signs flatlined. The systems gave up. The display went dark except for one metric, the backup power feeding the external optical feed, the thing that recorded what happened next. Rowe stood at the ridge. Ossian's claw found the pause control. The frame froze on him. He was standing, the first impossible thing. His left leg had no functional muscle remaining, the compound fracture from 22 minutes prior, the cauterization, the stimulant injection, and 32 additional minutes of load bearing had done what they were always going to do. The limb was failure. He was standing anyway on a limb that had no business supporting him. One arm hung wrong at the shoulder. The right ribs were open to the suit, not the internal cavity, but close enough that the suit's diagnostics had stopped bothering to report. The lateral thorax wound from the plasma bolt had done what a plasma bolt does at close range. He should have been dead 8 minutes prior. The other arm still gripped the empty rifle, not held loosely, gripped, the way you grip something when letting go would mean admitting it's over. The ridge behind him was empty. Not cleared by an airstrike, not swept by reinforcements. Empty because the advance line that had been moving toward him had stopped moving. They were all facing him. All 200-plus remaining soldiers of the Korath advance, all of them at the ridge. All of them watching the thing that should already be dead continue, standing in defiance of the data. The pheromone cohesion network had reached consensus. The consensus was hesitation. In that hesitation, Rowe's squad had moved. The feed's timestamp showed it clearly at 54:12, movement detected at the bunker position, repositioning. The Allied soldiers were using the 4 minutes he had given them. He had walked into the center of an advancing army, broken and empty, and made them turn around and watch him long enough for 5 scared humans to have a chance at survival. The squad leader Kess had 3 minutes now to reach the extraction zone, 36 seconds more and they would be clear. Rowe had purchased it with something the models said he didn't have to spend. Ossian held the freeze for nearly 20 seconds. The amphitheater did not move, did not speak, did not draw breath in any way that could be measured. Then Ossian pressed a secondary control. A forensic overlay appeared across the frozen frame, kill markers distributed across the engagement zone. Points of light. Each one a Korath soldier, each one no longer moving. The counter in the corner incremented to its final number, 312 confirmed, 57 additional incapacitated, one origin point. This, Ossian said into the silence, is not a tactical anomaly. He released the freeze. The footage played its last 4 seconds, the frame tilting as Roe went down, the timer on his shoulder strap catching the light one final time, the ridge shifting as his body failed the one demand it could no longer meet, and then the feed cut to black and did not return. The screen stayed dark for 8 seconds. The silence in the amphitheater was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. The lights in the amphitheater came back up. No one moved. The cadets sat in their positions as if the act of breathing might acknowledge what they had just witnessed. Preth's notation console remained closed. The Sarathi who had left was not returning. Emrek Das pressed both claws against the edge of his bench, a motion so identical to Ossian's lectern grip that it was clear the behavior was species-wide, a way of holding something real when the internal architecture was starting to fail. Ossian waited. He didn't fill the silence, he let it settle like sediment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been at the start of the lecture. I was 3 kilometers north of his position. Ridge Command, my unit held the elevation. We were supposed to hold it until the extraction window opened. He paused. The claw against the lectern found its place again. We held it because he made us hold it because he bought the time. A Thresi cadet raised a claw, a different cadet now, not Preth. You were there. I was there, Ossian confirmed. I held the ridge. I watched the advance line converge on him. I watched them stop. I watched them stand and stare at something their doctrine had no category for. His eyes, compound and dulled with age, scanned the amphitheater. The footage was never meant to leave the archives. It was classified above instructor clearance. The decision to show it to you is mine alone. I will take the consequences. He turned to the secondary display and activated a new file. The hegemony attempted cloning, he said. Surviving tissue samples existed from the engagement zone, 11 tissue types. The genetic template was intact. The programs ran for 11 years. Every clone made it through the physical conditioning. Every clone passed the combat simulations. Every clone failed at the same threshold. The data appeared on screen, a graph, physical parameters rising in a clean line, conditioning metrics climbing steadily, then a single threshold marked in red. At that threshold, every trial line dropped to 0. The trials required a choice, Ossian continued. A scenario with no survivable outcome. The soldier in the scenario could retreat, preserve function, survive with honor, or the soldier could advance knowing the mathematics said death was the only outcome. Every clone chose retreat, every single one. He let the graph hold on the screen. We never understood why the template refused to. Anal, the Sarathi cadet, raised her claw. Her voice was clinical, precise. The clones failed because they were testing something the original possessed. You're implying the original possessed something non-biological. I'm implying, Ossian said, that the body can be replicated, the decision cannot. A long silence followed, not the silence after the footage ended, a different kind of silence. The kind that happens when you realize you've been wrong about something fundamental and there's no way to unknow it. Ossian reached into the case and withdrew something else, a crystalline data storage unit no larger than a human fist, marked with Earth Standard encoding. This is the unedited personal log, recorded before the first shot. I have clearance to access it. I do not have clearance to show it to cadets. I'm showing it to you anyway. He said it on the lectern beside the brass timer. After this lecture concludes, cadets will maintain silence regarding this session. The footage is classified. The clone data is classified. The existence of this log is classified. If you discuss it, you will be detained pending investigation. If you leak it, you will be prosecuted. He looked directly at the room. The hegemony does not prosecute cadets lightly, but it will prosecute this. Preth made a small sound, not quite a click, something quieter. When Ossian's eyes found her, she was already looking away. That said, Ossian continued, there is a mechanism available to cadets who wish to volunteer for specialized assignment. The Terran quarantine perimeter maintains a skeletal observation post. It is not a prestigious posting. The atmosphere is barely breathable. The accommodation is minimal. The assignment is permanent, meaning cadets who volunteer will not return to standard academy tracks. He paused. Volunteers will be given access to the full archives. They will understand what they're protecting and what they're protecting against. He didn't ask who would volunteer. He didn't need to. Emrek Das's claws released from the bench edge. His expression, the subtle shifts in carapace angle that Vithrak used for emotional communication, showed something between grief and conviction. The Sarathi cadet Anal was already pulling up the volunteer form on her console. Her speed suggested she had made the decision before Ossian finished speaking. But it was Preth who moved first to the secondary display, the Thressie cadet who had mocked humans at the start of the lecture, the one who had laughed loudest and bet fastest. She approached the lectern without being asked and looked at the crystalline data storage unit for a long moment. "I want to volunteer," she said. "You understand the terms," Ossian said. It wasn't a question. "I want to volunteer," Preth repeated. She didn't elaborate, she didn't need to. Ossian processed the volunteer request. The system accepted it. Preth's cadet status updated in real time on the display, one moment marked as a standard track tactical candidate, the next moment reclassified as quarantine perimeter personnel, pending departure. The system issued a departure authorization with a timestamp. Departure clearance granted pending background verification, estimated departure window, 47 standard hours. The authorization line contained 3 words beyond the standard protocol language: bring courage. Preth read the authorization, turned from the lectern and walked back to her seat. She did not speak to her squadmates. She gathered her personal items and departed the amphitheater. Ossian watched her go. His claw found the lectern edge again. When the doors closed behind her, he continued as if she had never entered or left. What Sergeant Rowe possessed was not unique to humans. What was unique was the context in which it was required. He gestured to the brass timer. He refused to die before it ran out. Not out of superstition, out of decision. The timer was a contract with himself. The contract said, "You will not stop, the objective has not changed, you will continue." Emrek Das asked quietly, did the Korath understand what they were facing? "No," Ossian said. "That's why they hesitated. If they had understood, they would have killed him before he reached the ridge. They would have calculated the threat and neutralized it without hesitation. But something about him, the way he continued after the data said he should be dead, created a category error in their doctrine." They paused. That pause cost them 312 soldiers. He placed his claw on the data storage unit. "Earth's quarantine was self-imposed," he said. "The official extinction classification was an administrative choice made 19 years ago when maintaining the quarantine became inconvenient and expensive. It was easier to declare them extinct than to explain why they were still there, still watching, still existing in a state of voluntary isolation that no other species in the hegemony has ever attempted." He looked at the remaining cadets. They weren't extinct, they were waiting. And the difference between those two things was the most important lesson the Institute had ever failed to teach. The amphitheater stayed silent. "Class is dismissed," Ossian said. "Volunteers will receive their assignments within standard time. Non-volunteers will maintain the silence protocol." Departure. The cadet stood slowly, not the normal exit rhythm but something heavier, something that carried the weight of having learned something that couldn't be unknown. Emrek Das approached Ossian briefly, said something too quiet for the amphitheater to carry and departed. Anil submitted her formal volunteer request as she left. A Sarathi she had been sitting beside did not follow her, the pair that had been inseparable for 3 cycles, now moving in different directions through the exit tunnel. Ossian waited for the amphitheater to empty completely. When the last cadet had passed through the doors, he picked up the brass timer. The needle was still frozen at 54:38. He turned it over in his grip, examining the crack across the crystal face, the wear patterns on the winding knob from daily use. Rowe had kept this on his shoulder strapped through 100 drills, 1,000 hours of standard operations, until the moment when keeping time stopped being about hours and became about proving he could still decide. Ossian set it back on the lectern beside the crystalline data storage unit. He did not rewind the timer, he did not reset it. He left it frozen exactly as it had been recovered from the engagement zone, a moment fixed in brass and crystal, a proof that time could stop but a man could keep moving anyway. Usan Krall's transfer authorization arrived while she was still sitting in her seat. The notification came through her cadet console, a single line, system generated, no explanation attached, reassignment accepted. Terran Quarantine Perimeter Soulgate Relay Station, departure in 47 standard hours. Further briefing will be provided upon arrival. She read it 3 times, the words didn't change. Around her the amphitheater was emptying. Cadets who had not volunteered were filing toward the exits with the careful movements of people who had just learned something that couldn't be unknown and were trying very hard not to think about it. A few glanced at her as they passed, not with contempt, but with something closer to the reverence you felt for someone who had decided to walk toward the thing you were afraid of. Usan didn't look up from the notification. She had volunteered because Preth had volunteered first, and Preth had always been the one who laughed loudest, who mocked the fastest, who turned fear into noise before it could become something else. If Preth could stand in front of a room full of aliens and admit she was wrong about what humans were, then Usan could follow her there. The logic was simple. The decision had taken no time at all. Now it was real. The Soulgate relay station was a listening post on the edge of Terran space, not quite on Earth, not quite off it, a liminal thing that existed in the bureaucratic space between extinct and ignored. Cadets who posted there did not return. They did not transfer to other assignments. They stayed until they stopped being cadets and became something else entirely. Watchers, witnesses, keepers of a secret that the hegemony had decided was safer left in administrative silence. Usin gathered her items and stood. The relay station was not her final destination. That understanding came to her as she was walking toward the exit, a quiet realization that settled in like something she had always known but hadn't admitted to herself yet. The relay station was a way station, a preparation. The real assignment was somewhere further in, somewhere closer to Earth itself. She didn't know that for certain. Nothing in the authorization said it explicitly. But Ossian's eyes had held something when he spoke about the quarantine perimeter, not hope exactly, but a kind of purpose that transcended the normal institutional hierarchy. He had been there. He had held the ridge. Whatever he was sending volunteers toward, it wasn't just to maintain a listening post. It was to understand. The relay station was a small structure, more administrative than tactical, a central hub with dormitory modules branching off in 4 directions. All of it built in a gray alloy that didn't rust and didn't decay, that simply existed in a state of permanent neutrality. Usin arrived after a 3-day transit, was processed through decontamination protocol despite there being no contaminants to remove, and was assigned a dormitory module marked with a symbol she didn't recognize. The briefing came the next morning from a human. This was the first shock. The hegemony never stationed humans in official capacities outside Earth. Humans were extinct, or quarantined, or something the bureaucracy had decided was easier to classify as extinct than to explain. They didn't work in relay stations, they didn't give briefings. The human was scarred, old, damage, healed badly, the kind of healing that happened in field conditions when proper medical treatment wasn't available. Her name was Kess. She had been a squad leader in the Crater 7 engagement. "You're here," Kess said, "because Ossian leaked footage that was supposed to stay classified forever. You volunteered because you understood what that footage meant. That makes you either brave or stupid, and usually those are the same thing in the context of what needs to happen next." Usin had questions. She didn't ask them, she waited. "The unedited log exists," Kess continued. "The recording Roe made before the first shot. It's an archive at the Coastal Cliff installation on Earth. Ossian can show it to cadets through a data file, but he can't show them Earth. He doesn't have the clearance and he won't take the risk." Kess gestured to a transit vehicle waiting at the relay station's northern docking point. "You do, walk toward it. The rest will be explained when you arrive." The Coastal Cliff installation was smaller than Usin expected, a single structure built into rock, accessible only by a narrow path that wound down the cliff face itself. The grass at the top was longer than Usin's lower limb, waving in a wind that tasted of salt and something else, something organic that the recycled air of the relay station had never carried. Kess met her at the entrance. "I'll let you listen to the log before I show you anything else," Kess said. "That's Ossian's protocol. You should hear his voice before you understand what he's asking of you." She handed Usin the crystalline data storage unit, the same one that had sat on Ossian's lectern in the amphitheater. Usin activated it. Roe's voice filled the small chamber. Not filtered through an external feed or helmet communication system, just his voice. Quiet, direct, speaking into a recorder, rifle across his lap, oxygen at full charge, the objective still unknown to everyone but him. "If this gets found," he said, "if anyone watches this, then I guess I didn't make it. Doesn't matter. What matters is they know we were here, that we didn't stop." A pause, the sound of him adjusting his position. "No gods, no glory, just the line." The log ended. Usin stood in the silence that followed, the same silence that had filled the amphitheater when the footage went dark, a silence that was very loud. "What does that mean?" Usin asked. "The line." Kess gestured toward a case resting on a stone shelf carved into the cliff wall. "That's what we've been trying to understand for 19 years. The line is what Roe held, the objective that didn't change, the thing his clone body couldn't replicate because it wasn't biological." She opened the case. Inside, held on a velvet mounting, was the brass timer. The needle was still frozen at 54:38. The crystal face still bore its crack. The winding knob was worn smooth from years of daily use, then 19 more years of careful preservation. He kept time, Cass said, because keeping time meant something was still moving, something was still counting, something was still alive. When the timer ran out, he didn't stop. That's what the clones never understood. The models never account for that. She looked at Usin. Some things you can't teach. Some things you can only witness and try to understand. Usin reached for the timer, her claws, threshy chitinous digits, still sharp despite the care taken in handling, closed around the brass casing. It was warm, not from external heat, from the weight of being carried, of being held, of being a thing that mattered enough to preserve and carry across decades of silence and secrecy. Earth wasn't extinct, Usin said, it wasn't a question. No, Kes said, Earth was waiting. That's what Ossian couldn't quite say in the amphitheater without revealing too much. You don't quarantine yourself as a species unless you're protecting something or preparing for something. She walked to the cliff edge. The ocean below was vast and moving, a rhythm that had nothing to do with any doctrine or model. Ro was the proof, one soldier who refused to stop. The hegemony sent 340 soldiers and got no conquest. That's not a military victory, that's a statement. That says, we are not what you think we are not what your models can contain. Usin held the timer, the needle hadn't moved, it would never move again. Why are you telling me this? Usin asked. Because Ossian leaked the footage, Cass said. Because he knew that once the footage existed, the next question would follow, and the next, and the next. Until someone like you, someone who laughed at humans and then stopped laughing and volunteered anyway, walked to the edge of knowing and had to decide whether to keep standing there or step back. Kes turned from the cliff edge. You have the same choice Ro had, not with your life, with what you do next. You can take the timer back to the relay station, you can request reassignment back to the academy, you can go back to being a cadet in a galaxy that believes Earth is extinct. Or you stay, Kes said. You keep the timer, you become one of the witnesses, and when the next question arrives, and it will arrive, you help answer it, because the line isn't finished, it's just stopped moving for a moment. Usin looked at the timer in her grip. The needle at 54:38, the moment fixed in brass and crystal. A man standing on a ridge with no function left, holding time like a contract with himself. She did not go back to the relay station. The transfer request was processed the next morning. Usin Kral, former cadet of the Vithrak Tactical Institute, reclassified as permanent observation personnel, Earth Station. No return date specified, no reassignment offered. She held the brass timer at the cliff edge and watched the ocean move. The salt wind carried the sound of it, a rhythm that had nothing to do with 54 minutes or 38 seconds, just the continuation, just the refusal to stop. The needle didn't move, it had already said everything it needed to say.